Have you ever seen someone quietly walk onto a first-class flight, no jewelry, no designer suit, and watch the entire cabin decide they didn't belong? What if the woman they overlooked was the one holding the keys to the airline itself? This isn't just a story about power. It's about how silence can shake the sky. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of O'Hare International, casting pale gold streaks across polished tile floors and the steady stream of travelers. Businessmen in crisp suits, women in sleek dresses pulling silver-edged carry-ons, and the occasional family in matching shirts moved through the terminal like clockwork. Among them, unnoticed and unbothered, walked a woman in a linen shirt the color of sand, khaki pants, and scuffed leather flats. Her hair was tucked beneath a simple headscarf, and she carried a single bag, soft leather, worn at the corners. She kept her head down, not out of shame but out of habit. Her name was Zarita Langston. The overhead screen blinked steadily, VX882, Billionaire, departure gate C22, on time, destination, Atlanta, Georgia. She moved with quiet certainty toward the entrance of Blue Nadir Lounge. A suited man ahead of her was greeted with a smile and a crisp, "Welcome back, Mr. Dalton." When it was her turn, the receptionist hesitated, taking her in with a glance that lingered too long. "This lounge is reserved for first-class passengers, ma'am." Zarita said nothing. She simply reached into her shirt pocket and unfolded her boarding pass. "First class, seat 1A." The woman scanned it, blinked, and stepped aside without another word. Inside the lounge, the world moved slower. People sipped espresso from porcelain cups. Laptops hummed on marble tables. Soft jazz drifted from the ceiling. Zarita chose a quiet corner near the window and poured herself a glass of water. No wine, no espresso, no noise. Outside, a silver plane with Verelian's gold insignia rolled toward gate 22. 20 minutes later, boarding began. As Zarita stepped onto the aircraft, the flight attendant at the front, mid-40s, polished, poised, gave her a brief nod. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." Her badge read, Verna Clay. Verna's smile dimmed slightly when she saw the woman in simple clothes, no designer bag, no visible jewelry. A pause, half a second, not long enough to be called rude, but long enough to be felt. "Seat 1A is just over there," she said, gesturing with a practiced hand. Zarita nodded and settled into the seat by the window. She tucked her bag under the seat, leaned back and observed. The cabin filled slowly. Verna stopped by each arriving passenger, addressing them by name if she could, offering to hang coats, smiling with just the right amount of deference. When a man in a navy blazer took 1B, she called him Sir and placed his bag in the overhead bin herself. She didn't return to Zarita, not once. When the doors closed and the aircraft taxied, Zarita closed her eyes briefly, listening. The hum of engines soothed her more than annoyed her, until it didn't. About 20 minutes into the flight, she felt it, the subtle shift in air pressure. The fan above her had quieted, and the air turned warm and stale. She took a breath, then another, shallow and sharp. Her throat tightened and she pushed the call button. Verna arrived, the same polished smile on her lips. "Yes. The air isn't circulating back here," Zarita said calmly. "Would it be possible to move to one of the empty seats up front? Just until it clears." Verna looked toward the unoccupied seats, then back at her. "That's not how seating works. Everyone has their place." Zarita spoke gently. "It's a health concern, not a preference." Verna's voice rose just slightly. "Look, you can't just move because you feel like it. This is first class, not a shuttle bus." Heads turned. A few passengers watched now, pretending not to. "I'm not asking for anything special," Zarita said, her voice still even. "Just courtesy." Verna stepped closer and placed a hand, firm and abrupt, on Zarita's shoulder. "Sit down and stop making a scene." The contact was brief but unmistakable. Zarita didn't move, didn't respond, but her eyes, once patient and calm, turned still and icy. A few rows back, an elderly man in a gray blazer shifted in his seat. His name was Albie Rowan. He said nothing, but the expression on his face tightened. Verna walked away without looking back, convinced the situation was under control. Zarita reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and typed a short message with practiced fingers. She hit send, slipped the phone back into her pocket, and stared out the window. The clouds outside passed slowly. Nobody else on board knew what that message meant. Not yet, but for Airline and for everyone watching, everything had just begun to change. Zarita sat still beside the window, arms resting gently on her lap, phone untouched since the last message had gone out. Her face remained unreadable, though a soft reflection of light danced across her cheek from the passing clouds. She looked out, but her mind wasn't on the sky. It was on the pattern. She'd seen it enough to know it by heart. The subtle signs of being judged before speaking, dismissed before being seen. Across the aisle, the rest of first class hummed with polite stillness. Verna made her way row by row with practiced ease, refilling drinks, adjusting trays, asking, "Anything else for you?" with the same charm she'd mastered over the years. She didn't glance at seat 1A. Nobody asked questions. Nobody intervened. Albie Rowan, sitting in 2D, watched. He wasn't trying to stare. He just couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen something like this before, too many times in his life to pretend it didn't matter now. He adjusted his glasses, glanced down at the small leather notebook in his hand. The cover was soft from years of use. His pen hovered, then paused. He didn't write. Somewhere inside, he was still deciding whether saying something too late was better than not saying anything at all. In the crew's rest alcove, 10 minutes later, Verna scrolled through the control panel on the mounted screen. It showed passenger seat maps, requests, and a few flag profiles. Seat 1A was partially restricted. Private traveler, no frequent flyer data, no notes from booking staff. Verna squinted. The last name wasn't showing, just initials. ZL. "Who is she?" Verna muttered aloud. Behind her, Nessa, the youngest crew member on board, tilted her head. "You mean 1A?" Verna nodded without looking up. "I think you were a bit sharp with her earlier," Nessa said, careful with her tone. "I followed the protocol," Verna replied. "She wanted to move seats. We don't allow that mid-flight without cause." "She said she couldn't breathe," Nessa offered quietly. Verna's eyes flicked over. "Nessa, we're not doctors. We're trained to maintain order. The cabin has systems. Everyone's uncomfortable sometimes." Nessa said nothing more. Verna returned her attention to the screen, but her stomach felt off. Something about the woman in 1A didn't sit right, not because of what she wore, but because of how she held herself. Calm, unbothered, as if she'd seen this before and wasn't surprised in the least. About 45 minutes into the flight, they reached cruising altitude. Passengers settled into their movies or magazines. Some sipped wine, others drifted to sleep. Verna passed by 1A again. Zarita sat still as ever, eyes ahead but unfocused. Her hands rested quietly, her expression relaxed but distant, like someone not truly there. She didn't look at Verna as she passed. That silence, measured, intentional, unsettled Verna more than yelling ever could have. 3 rows back, Albie opened his notebook again, still blank. He thought back to a trial he'd worked on in the 70s. Mississippi, a young black woman removed from a bus for asking to keep her seat after a white passenger claimed it. He'd argued her case and won. But what stuck with him wasn't the verdict. It was the 2 years she spent living with fear, just for insisting she belonged. The plane shuddered slightly. Nothing serious. A tremble in the cabin that made ice clink against glass. Zarita straightened a little. She took a slow breath, then another. The air wasn't much better, but she didn't complain. She didn't reach for the button again. Instead, she reminded herself what her mother once said during long shifts at the hospital. "You don't win battles by yelling. You win them by outlasting what's meant to wear you down." Zarita pulled her phone from her lap. The screen lit up with a single message. Received. Disembarkation team ready at private terminal. Legal and operations have been briefed. Do you want a formal action initiated upon landing? She read it, then tapped the screen off. Not yet. In the cockpit, the pilot's message alert chimed. He opened the screen and read the notification. Incoming internal dispatch. Air Systems, Senior Oversight Executive will board flight VX882 upon arrival at ATL. Crew must remain in position. Do not announce. He didn't recognize the sender's code, ZA-LAH/PRIO. He turned to the co-pilot. That's not one of ours, is it? The co-pilot shook his head. Must be from Holdings. They exchanged a glance. That kind of tag wasn't handed out lightly. It usually meant someone way up the ladder, way up. Back in first class, Verna refilled water at seat 1B, still without acknowledging 1A. Zarita sat unmoving. To Verna, it might have seemed like she had de-escalated the situation. To Zarita, the silence was deliberate. The difference between being overlooked and being underestimated was paper thin, and the weight of that silence was about to land harder than anyone expected. The plane floated steady above thick layers of cloud, sailing eastward with barely a tremble. Inside first class, the lights had dimmed to a warm amber hue. It was the kind of lighting meant to calm nerves, to soothe high-paying passengers into soft conversations or quiet naps. But nobody was talking. Nobody was laughing. There was an unease in the air. Not quite fear, but something close, like walking into a room where someone had just left angry. Even those who weren't sure what had happened sensed something had. Zarita sat motionless in 1A. Her eyes were closed, though her breathing was measured and shallow. She pressed her fingertips lightly to her temple, not from illness, but to steady herself. Keeping calm wasn't instinct for her. It was practice. From behind, Verna approached with a tray of snack baskets and towels. She didn't look at Zarita. Her smile was aimed 2 rows over, where an older man accepted a bag of almonds with a chuckle. Her hands didn't shake, but the muscles in her jaw had tightened just a little. The kind of small detail only noticed by people who were used to being watched. Albie Rowan sat in 2D, legs crossed, a folded newspaper resting on his thigh. He hadn't read a word of it. His eyes kept drifting forward, back to seat 1A. He leaned forward slightly, considering whether to say something. But then he settled back again, shoulders tense. Maybe it wasn't his place, maybe it was too late. Maybe she didn't want help. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd seen this before. Verna's tone, the deliberate cheer with one person, the cold efficiency with another. The subtle changes, small enough to deny, but sharp enough to cut. It was never just one person's fault. That kind of behavior grew in silence, fed by routine. Back in 1A, Zarita opened her eyes. The air still felt close, almost stale. A faint pressure built behind her eyes, and she blinked through it. She'd grown up in places where things broke and never got fixed. You learned to breathe around the problem. Just as she shifted in her seat, a quiet voice came from her left. "Ma'am, are you still not feeling well?" It was Nessa, the younger flight attendant with wide, uncertain eyes. She crouched slightly, hands folded in front of her. I noticed the airflow's still weak back here." Zarita turned to look at her. Not angry, not offended, just tired. "Thank you," she said softly. "Yes, but I'm fine now." Nessa hesitated. "I could bring you some water if you'd like. Or, if you want, I could ask again about moving seats." Zarita gave a slight shake of her head. "You're kind, but it's already noted." Nessa nodded and backed away, unsure whether she'd done something right or stepped into something she didn't understand. Meanwhile, in the crew alcove, Verna watched the exchange on the overhead cabin monitor. Her eyes narrowed. "She's manipulating," she muttered, "playing the poor woman card." Without much thought, she tapped a setting on the screen and tagged seat 1A with a private note. Monitor passenger interaction. Possible escalation risk. Moments later, Nessa re-entered the alcove. Verna didn't look at her. "Next time, follow protocol," she said coolly. "If a passenger has a concern, it comes through me. No exceptions." Nessa murmured a quiet, "Yes, ma'am," and returned to her duties. Then something unexpected happened. A man in 3A stood up abruptly, waving his hand to get attention. "The AC's not working up here either," he said. "It's hot as hell." His voice carried farther than intended. Heads turned. Verna appeared almost instantly, her voice soft and concerned. "Just a temporary imbalance," she said. "We're adjusting it now. Please return to your seat, sir." Zarita watched all of it. The man had barely raised his voice. yet was met with concern. No talk of causing a scene, no dismissive tone, no physical contact. Verna passed by 1A on her way back. This time Zarita looked up, their eyes locked. Zarita's voice was low and calm. You act differently when the complaint comes from someone else. Verna stopped walking. She leaned in just slightly, dropped her voice. You can't assume everything's about race. Zarita didn't flinch. Her reply was as quiet as it was clear. Assumption is what got us here. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Verna blinked once, stiffened, and walked away. In the cockpit, a message pinged on the onboard dispatch screen. Retain all cabin security footage post-flight. Evaluation in progress. Crew to remain on board after landing for review. No announcement. The captain exhaled through his nose. Guess we've got someone important on board, he said to the co-pilot. Probably a secret shopper or corporate. He didn't notice the tag at the bottom. Zala/Preo. Back in 1A, Zarita rested both hands on her knees, palms up, fingers gently tapping in rhythm, like a clock counting backwards. She wasn't angry anymore. She was preparing, not for vengeance, for correction. The plane had leveled off into its final stretch, gliding smooth above Georgia's layered horizon. The hum of the engines filled the background, soft and even, like a metronome counting down the end of something quiet but significant. No turbulence, no announcements. But in first class, the atmosphere remained taut, held together by courtesy and something unspoken that lingered just under the surface. Zarita hadn't moved in nearly 30 minutes. Her posture was upright, her hands loosely clasped in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't sip from the water bottle tucked in the seat pocket. She was thinking, not just about the flight, but about the moment that was coming next. This wasn't just a ride from Chicago to Atlanta. It was a decision in motion. She thought back to the boardroom just the night before. They were seated around the long oval table at Langston Ether Holdings, the blinds drawn, the mood cautious. The acquisition of Verelian Air had been finalized only weeks prior, and the executive team had convened to discuss due diligence. We've got full audits on the service structure, one of the directors had said. Everything checks out, above industry standard. Another chimed in. We've already sent in testers anonymously. No red flags. But Zarita had raised a hand gently and spoken with a calm resolve that no one in the room dared challenge. No press releases, no teams. I'll go myself. Ma'am, you're suggesting... I'm not suggesting, she said. I'm telling you. No name, no recognition. If I'm treated like everyone else, then we'll know what our standards really mean. They hadn't tried to stop her, but none of them truly believed she'd go through with it. Now here she was, seat 1A, 1 hour from landing, 1 moment from shifting the ground beneath an entire company. Nessa reappeared, quietly placing a glass of water with lemon on her tray table. No words, just a small offering. I wasn't sure if you'd want anything, she said softly, but this might help. Zarita looked up. Her expression softened. Thank you. You're the only one who's asked how I'm doing. Nessa hesitated, then leaned in a little. If you felt treated unfairly, I just want to say, not all of us think that way. Zarita's gaze held hers a moment longer. There was no anger, only the weariness of someone who had seen too much to be surprised. I know, she said, but silence is a choice too, and sometimes it says more than words ever could. Nessa looked down, nodded, and walked away, her face thoughtful, maybe even ashamed. Zarita turned her attention back to her phone. A string of messages had come in from her executive support team. The updates were direct, concise, and ready for action. Incident summary complete. Media outlets on standby, CNN, NBC, the route. We can go public within 2 hours, just say the word. Zarita scrolled through them slowly. Her thumb hovered. It would be easy to launch a statement. Headlines by noon. A clip of Verna's behavior. Maybe a press conference. Within 24 hours, the company would be scrambling, public apologies flowing, people losing jobs, a wave of commentary crashing down on every channel. But easy wasn't the goal. Zarita leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Her mind reached back to her mother long ago, in a parking lot behind a drugstore in Montgomery. Still in her white nurse's uniform, Her mother had been denied entry at the counter by a clerk who didn't want to serve coloreds. No one had filmed it. There was no outcry, no social media. Just the sound of her mother's quiet steps walking away, holding her dignity like glass, fragile but never broken. In that memory, Zarita found her answer. Her phone buzzed again. "Still want to keep this internal?" She typed, "We handle this quietly. Begin internal restructuring, no press." And she pressed send. 3 rows behind her, Verna adjusted a folded blanket and made another round through the aisle. Her steps were confident again. In her mind, the fire had been smothered. No escalation, no formal complaint, no calls from the ground crew. She'd done what she always did, contain and move on. She didn't notice the stillness in Zarita's face. The absence of heat wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Some mistakes make a sound when they crack. Others break with no noise at all. Up in the cockpit, the captain flipped the intercom on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Atlanta. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Zarita reached down and clicked her belt in place. She adjusted, nothing else. No sigh, no tension in her jaw, just a long, even breath. The time for speaking would come, but not now. She had chosen not to destroy, to rebuild. And in that decision, the weight of 1,000 silences began to shift the bones of something much bigger than a single flight. The plane dipped gently through gauzy layers of cloud as Atlanta came into view, the city stretching wide and glittering like a mosaic of glass and heat below. Seatbacks clicked upright, tray tables locked, seatbelts buckled. It looked like a standard descent. For most it was, but Zarita Langston knew better. She looked out at the skyline, familiar yet distant, and let her fingers rest lightly against the armrest. Cool metal under skin, grounding her in what came next. Her heart wasn't racing. This wasn't adrenaline. It was readiness. She had known from the moment she booked the ticket under initials only that this landing would mean more than arrival. Behind her, Verna was gathering up linen napkins and straightening headrests, her voice low as she spoke with another attendant. "Smooth flight," Verna said, sounding satisfied. "No delays, no complaints. One of the good ones." Nessa opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. She had seen the shift in the air, felt the tension in seat 1A, and more than anything, witnessed a woman who didn't act like a typical first-class flyer. She had felt the quiet restraint behind Zarita's eyes and knew this wasn't just another passenger. She just didn't know what it meant. Then the unexpected happened. As the wheels touched down and the plane rolled to a slow crawl toward the gate, a chime sounded over the intercom. But the voice that followed wasn't the captain's. "Attention, all crew. By request of corporate oversight, a Varelian Air executive representative will be boarding prior to disembarkation. All staff are to remain at designated stations." Verna's brow furrowed. Executive oversight? On a domestic flight? She scanned the cabin instinctively. Nothing looked out of place. But the words had landed heavily, especially the tone. Formal, final, and coming from far higher up than anyone on this aircraft. The jet bridge connected. The door hissed. And then, instead of a ground agent or cleaning crew, a tall man in a pale gray suit stepped on board. His badge was crisp and clear. LAH, Compliance, Tier 1. He didn't pause at the front. He walked straight down the aisle and stopped in front of seat 1A. He bowed his head slightly. "Ms. Langston, we're ready. Your team is waiting." The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Verna blinked, stunned. Nessa's hands went slack, dropping a rolled napkin to the floor. Albie Rowan exhaled slowly in 2D. A quiet smile touched his lips. That explained everything. Zarita rose without a word. No dramatic pause, no grand speech, just quiet composure. She lifted her bag, stepped into the aisle, and walked past Verna without even glancing her way. It was over, and it had only just begun. 30 minutes later, she walked into the Orion suite at the Atlanta terminal, a sleek, sealed conference room lined with frosted glass and navy blue chairs. 7 members of Varelian's executive board sat at the table. They had been told a senior stakeholder was arriving to conduct a surprise audit. None of them expected her. Zarita sat at the head of the table. Her laptop was already open. She connected it to the screen without preamble. What appeared was not a spreadsheet or a legal clause. It was a screenshot, a still image taken from the flight's internal monitor. Verna's notation on the control panel: Passenger 1A, flag for monitoring, potential manipulation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You don't fix a broken culture with silence, Zarita said. You fix it by holding people accountable, publicly. There was no reaction from the board, only the kind of pause that suggested the air had been sucked from the room. Then came the orders. Effective immediately, Verna Clay is to be placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. A full internal audit will begin, focusing on first-class interactions over the past 12 months. She tapped a key, and we begin implementation of the Above All Alliance, a full training initiative focused on bias awareness, interpersonal conduct, and dignity-first service. No exceptions, no delays. There were no protests, only scribbled notes and tightened jaws. Finally, she leaned back, her voice steady as ever. If you treat people based on what they wear, you are not fit to wear this brand. The room stayed silent long after she stopped speaking. When she stepped out into the hallway, Nessa was waiting. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she had followed from a distance. Her face was pale, her posture unsure. Zarita paused. You were the only one who saw me, she said softly. Nessa lowered her eyes. I wasn't sure if I should have done more. You did enough, Zarita said. Then she smiled. Not wide, just warm. Next time, do more. And she walked on. Not with the stride of someone who just made a point, but with the steady, certain pace of someone who had turned a quiet insult into a blueprint for reform. And behind her, a system had no choice but to follow. The conference room still held the weight of what had just unfolded. A meeting meant to clarify next steps had turned into something deeper, something irreversible. No one had stood to leave. A few executives exchanged glances, quiet and anxious as if waiting for permission to breathe again. Zarita stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, marker in hand, remnants of the new training framework still outlined behind her. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't posturing. She simply stood in the stillness, knowing the storm wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. The Above All Alliance, she had called it. Not just a retraining program, not just a response to one flight. It was a redefinition of the company's values, and it wasn't going to stop with Billionaire. A senior HR executive finally spoke, his voice careful. Ms. Langston, if we go public with this, the media will spin it. We'll be accused of instability. The brand's reputation— Zarita turned slowly, meeting his eyes. The brand's reputation was built on perception, she said, not truth, not trust. If it shatters under the weight of honesty, maybe it shouldn't exist at all. No one answered. There was no rebuttal that didn't sound hollow in the room. Meanwhile, in a separate office near the passenger services wing, Verna sat alone. Her uniform jacket had been folded on her lap. Her badge had been taken at the gate. 2 security officers stood quietly outside the door. It wasn't jail, but it wasn't freedom either. A voice recorder had already been placed in front of her. She had spoken a little, enough to acknowledge the incident, enough to confirm the passenger's identity after the fact. She tapped her fingers on the edge of the small desk, not in defiance, but in confusion. This wasn't how things went. She had dealt with difficult passengers before. She'd raised her voice, been stern, assertive, she always called it, but this time it had unraveled. Not because Zarita had made a scene, but because she hadn't. Verna swallowed hard. Somewhere deep down, a thought pressed against her certainty. Maybe this wasn't just about protocol. Maybe it never had been. Back in the boardroom, a corporate counsel approached Zarita with a different suggestion. If you'd prefer discretion, he said low and smooth, we could settle this quietly. Let her go with an internal statement. No press. Protect the airline. Protect you. He was offering her the path most leaders took. The PR safe route. No headlines, no upheaval. Zarita didn't answer right away. She looked out the window again. Across the terminal, a stream of passengers flowed past the glass, rolling bags behind them, eyes glazed from travel. Among them, one woman caught her attention. Elderly, wearing a worn white nursing uniform, shoulders bent slightly under the weight of age and habit. Someone cut in front of her at the escalator. She didn't protest. Zarita's breath caught. It looked just like her mother in the 1980s, coming home from overnight shifts at the hospital, getting pushed aside in line, never saying a word, always keeping her head down, always moving forward, as if the world simply didn't know her space. That memory broke the silence in her chest. She turned back to the room. There will be a press conference tonight, 6 o'clock. Full disclosure. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Another took a long drink of water. No backroom apologies, Zarita said. No more covering culture with courtesy. She took a breath, not out of nerves, but to make space for what came next. If this company crumbles because we told the truth, then it wasn't built on anything worth saving. The room fell still again, and in that stillness, something larger than compliance or branding settled in. Responsibility. Later that afternoon, Zarita stepped into a smaller holding room near the legal office, where Verna sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. There were no cameras, no reporters, just the two of them. Verna stood, smoothing her shirt as if it mattered. Her voice was shaky but trying to sound composed. "Ms. Langston, I didn't know." Zarita held up a hand. "I'm not here for explanations. I'm here to ask you one thing." She stepped closer. "Do you believe someone like me didn't belong in seat 1A just because I didn't look the part?" Verna froze. Her lips parted, but no answer came. I followed the rules. I thought, the rules didn't tell you to lay hands on me," Zarita said, calm but direct. "They didn't tell you to raise your voice. That wasn't the policy talking. That was you, and you counted on nobody calling you on it." Verna's hands tightened in her lap. "I wasn't trying to be cruel," she said softly. "I thought I was keeping order." Zarita tilted her head. "You weren't keeping order. You were keeping control. There's a difference." She stepped back, voice low now. Not for Verna's sake, but because what she said next was more for the world to hear. "You won't just be dismissed," she said. "You'll be the example. Not out of punishment, but out of clarity. So the next person will think twice before assuming dignity has a dress code." Verna looked down. There was nothing left to say. Zarita turned and walked away, not with triumph, but with resolve. Her heels tapped softly against the tile floor, the echo gentle but certain. Behind her was a silence that would never again mean indifference. Ahead of her was a podium, and the truth. The room was almost full now, rows of folding chairs pressed close together, camera rigs humming quietly as journalists checked audio and framed their shots. The backdrop behind the podium bore a simple message in dark blue. Langston Ether Holdings, statement on Verelian Air. No taglines, no logo splash, just clarity. Zarita Langston stood behind the curtain, dressed in a charcoal suit with clean lines. No jewelry, no designer flair. Her hair was pinned back with quiet elegance. In her hand was a printed speech, 8 neatly typed paragraphs, now folded twice and torn down the center. Her assistant whispered, "Are you sure you don't want a teleprompter?" Zarita looked up, her voice steady. "I'm not here to perform. I'm here to tell the truth." Then the lights came on. She walked to the podium slowly, without waving, without smiling. The clicking of cameras rose and fell like rain on a rooftop. Then silence. She spoke without introduction. "This afternoon," she began, "I completed a flight that lasted just under 2 hours, but the experience brought me back over 40 years on this soil." The room held its breath. "I asked to switch seats due to a health concern. I was denied. I was spoken to with disrespect. I was touched, without permission, and treated as though I didn't belong in the very seat I had purchased." She let that settle. A few pens stopped moving. "I wore a linen shirt, no diamonds, no tailored suit, and for that I was invisible." A reporter raised a hand, bold enough to interrupt. "Ms. Langston, are you saying this was a case of racial discrimination?" Zarita met his gaze. I'm saying this was a case of visual assumption, which is far more dangerous, because it hides behind politeness." In a living room miles away, Verna sat hunched over a laptop, alone. The live stream flickered across the screen. She hadn't touched her tea. Her hands were still. Watching Zarita now, she didn't feel angry. She didn't feel sorry for herself. What she felt was something colder, heavier, shame. Zarita wasn't making a scene. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was offering something far more powerful, a mirror. Back at the podium, Zarita paused, then continued, her tone never rising. Today, I do not speak only for Langston Ether Holdings. I speak for every person who has walked into a refined space and been treated as an intruder. She scanned the crowd. I am ordering a 48-hour suspension of all Virilian air flight attendants. Every one of them will be required to complete a new training protocol, developed not by corporate, but by an independent civilian oversight board. A collective inhale from the crowd. This is not a punishment. This is a reset. She placed both hands on the podium, her voice unwavering. I do not believe in burning down what can be rebuilt, but power is only useful if it makes something better. If it doesn't, it becomes vanity, and I am not here for vanity. Outside the conference room, Twitter feeds lit up. Posts, shares, quotes, all pouring in by the second. Zarita Langston changes the sky. She didn't yell, she rewrote, when dignity doesn't need volume. At home, Albie Rowan watched from his couch. He'd seen countless press statements in his lifetime, most forgettable. But this felt different. He flipped open the same notebook he hadn't touched during the flight, and now finally he wrote. His op-ed would run in the Sunday edition. I've seen silence used to excuse cruelty, but today I saw silence used to expose it. That's the kind of quiet we should learn to listen to. Back in the conference hall, Zarita gave no rousing conclusion, no call to action. Instead, she ended with a look toward the rear doors, where a small group of young flight attendants stood silently, shoulders tense, eyes unsure. Among them, Nessa. Zarita walked toward them, stopping just long enough to speak directly to her without fanfare. It's yours to protect now, she said gently. Nessa's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. Then Zarita left the room, not hurried, not triumphant, just walking forward, one deliberate step at a time. With each step, the air in the building seemed to change, lighter somehow, not because the work was done, but because someone had finally decided to do it. 3 days had passed since the press conference. The skies over Atlanta were calmer now. No more breaking headlines, no more live streams bouncing across every screen. But inside Virilian Air's headquarters, things had never moved faster. Every flight attendant, from senior crew leads to the newest hires, was now enrolled in the Above All Alliance. It wasn't just a training, it was the company's first passenger-informed behavioral ethics course, designed not from a boardroom, but shaped by the real voices of those who flew. A new culture was starting to take root, one that didn't read people by their wristwatch, their coat, or their skin tone, but by how they should have been seen all along, as people. Inside a quiet conference room, Zarita sat alone, reviewing the first formal report from the independent oversight group. It was detailed, it was honest, and it was uncomfortable. 5 years of buried complaints, patterns that had gone unnoticed or unchallenged, data that told stories no one had wanted to read, until now. A notification popped up in her inbox, from Albie Rowan. Subject, she changed the altitude. It was a draft of an op-ed he was preparing for The Atlantic. The first line read, "Silence is the only weapon history cannot distort when it is wielded with purpose." Zarita leaned back, letting the words settle. Then she smiled, a small smile, the kind that comes not from winning, but from knowing the weight you carried meant something after all. Just across from the terminal, in a modest coffee shop, Verna sat at the window with a steaming mug between her hands. A folded newspaper lay open to a feature titled, "Virilian Restructures, Former Attendant Speaks on Lessons Learned." Her quote was tucked near the end. I thought I was maintaining order, but I was preserving a pattern I didn't have the courage to question. I was fired, and rightly so, but I'm grateful to have been stopped before I forgot how to see people. Nobody asked her to write the piece. There were no press agents involved, no curated apology tour, just her, owning it. At the new training center, Nessa stood at the front of a modest room filled with new hires in freshly pressed uniforms. She hadn't planned to become a trainer, but someone had asked, Would you share what you saw? And she had said yes. She spoke without notes. Don't assume you're passengers, she said. Ask, listen, and remember, what you miss in a glance might be the most important thing they're carrying. A voice in the back asked, and what if we get it wrong? Nessa didn't flinch. Then say sorry, make it right, and remember it so you don't do it again. That evening, Zarita returned to a small cabin tucked beneath a stretch of trees on the edge of Decatur. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't where most imagined a CEO would sleep after changing a company, but it was home. She didn't go to her high-rise, didn't call for press. Instead, she stepped into the quiet kitchen where the smell of ginger still clung to the cabinets, and her mother's old rocking chair waited near the back window. She kicked off her shoes, letting her bare feet meet the creaky wooden floor. From the inside pocket of her jacket, she pulled a handwritten envelope. The return address was from a high school in North Carolina. It was from a girl named Kyla. The letter read, Ms. Langston, I saw you on TV today. I've never seen anyone like my mom standing at a podium like that before. I don't know what I'll grow up to be, but now I know I can sit anywhere I want. Because of you. Zarita read it once. Then again. She folded it gently, set it beside a worn book on the coffee table, and closed her eyes. No applause, no spotlight. Just breathe. A quiet exhale that felt like it came from a deeper place than her lungs, like it had waited years to be released. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady on the tin roof. The wind stirred the trees just beyond the porch. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just nature doing what it always did. Moving forward. She sat on the old rocker, a mug of hot tea warming her hands, eyes fixed on the shimmer of leaves in the dusk light. She didn't need statues or speeches, because something had shifted. And it wasn't just one airline. It wasn't just one trip. It was the space between people. What we think we know when we see each other, and what we choose to offer instead. Respect, room, and the belief that we all belong. And in that space, something better could begin. Sometimes the loudest change comes from the quietest courage. Zarita didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Her story reminds us that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply refuses to look away. So what would you do if you had the power to shift the culture around you? Would you protect it or dare to rebuild it? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more stories that inspire reflection and an action.